Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's topic, I want to discuss basically storylines, in particular TV shows that keep with the same cast of characters rather than replacing them. They kind of backtrack and explain what I'm talking about. This kind of starts with, like, once again, kind of giving him props because he's kind of what sparked this this video, because it's just an interesting conversation. Wooly from Super Best Friends play. Like, I've kind of talked about this a little bit in the past, but obviously, like, using the example of Stranger Things, he prefers it if Stranger Things had followed a different group of characters each season. Like, for example, for him, like, you know, I've talked about it before, he's a big fan of an anthology series, you know, so for him, it's like it would be more interesting if we follow different characters each time. But obviously, as you can see with Stranger Things, and obviously kind of continuing that with Stranger Things 3, we're following the same group of characters. Obviously new characters are being added on, but the core cast is still the same. So for me, and I've talked about this before because I'm not really a fan of anthology series for that particular reason. That's why, like, something like, once again, American Horror Stories is kind of in the middle for me, because it's like it's a whole thing. I've kind of already discussed it in the past in the whole video, so I really won't go too much into it. But to me, it's such a fascinating thing because I understand where he's coming from in a sense of, like, he feels like a lot of TV shows, and I guess this could apply to other mediums as well, and it especially comes with movies and stuff like that too, because when it comes to sequels, a lot of sequels are obviously following the same characters. Well, it's like, no, like, a lot of people are afraid to let go of certain characters. Like, oh, these are characters you become attached to, and it's a scary thing because you never know how people will react to these new characters and new, you know, it's kind of like staying with a set of characters is a safe bet, because it's always fine. I'm always fine with new characters being added on, but as long as the core group is the same, that's where I stand on, because for me, it's like, these are the characters I've gotten attached to for this amount of time, especially in the case of Stranger Things. Who knows, maybe eventually down the road after season 3 they might decide to change up and get a completely different cast, but you know, so far this is a cast we've gotten 2 seasons with, so they're very near and dear to your heart, and that kind of applies to a lot of other series as well. It's kind of interesting because there's like 2 examples at least that I'm familiar with. I'm not saying they're the only 2 examples, but they're examples I think would kind of fit what Wooly feels like, and that's the TV show Misfits, as well as Being Human, the original British series. By the end of their runs, they have a completely different cast. Once again, to be fair, that's because that's not until like almost near the end of the series, so it's not like they did it seasonally, but you know, just for whatever reasons, storytelling, the actors deciding to leave the show, whatever the case may be, near the end of both shows you have a completely different cast, which is kind of an interesting thing. Those shows, I feel like I don't mind it as much. It still kind of bothers me to a certain extent, but it's just kind of like, okay, these are new characters I kind of fallen in love with, so I'm okay with that. But I think that kind of fits more of what he's talking about, or what he'd kind of like, but he probably would want it to happen sooner in a series, because it's actually interesting, because I say TV and movies, but comic books kind of do it very nicely in the sense of you do see different people. Like, even though, like, you take a lot of superhero stuff, for example, it follows different characters in a sense of there are different people who pick up monikers, whether it be like the Flash, for example. I've talked about this many times. Like the Flash, there are multiple people who've taken up the moniker of the Flash. There's Jay Garrett, and even then, like, Barry Allen the Flash, there's, you know, Wally West, who eventually takes up the mantle and suit, and so does Barry's grandson Bart. He eventually takes it up too. So you're following the same character, but you're following different people who are playing that character. You know, they have different personalities, who they are, their core is very different. A lot of their principles might be the same, but they're different characters. Another great example, kind of along the same lines, would be like Miles Morales versus Peter Parker, or versus Miguel O'Hara or Ben Reilly. Like, there are so many different Spider-Man. And then same thing with like Batman Beyond. It's like, you know, Bruce Wayne to Terry, the differences in who they are. So I think those are great examples of doing that, because like I said, I can understand why he feels like that, because a lot of TV shows aren't willing to do that. Like even using superhero TV shows, for example, I don't think there's been a superhero TV show, at least more recently, that's had like a dramatic cast change. Like, obviously there's been like some major characters here and there who've, you know, died, or their storylines have kind of left them to leave the show. But other than that, like a great example would be like, well, using the Flash, for example, like Barry hasn't been replaced as the Flash as of yet, but then you take someone like Green Arrow, no one else has picked up the moniker. Potentially they might be dealing with that in season 7, you know, that depends on how they play that whole thing out. I guess the closest one would be Legends, because it's had the most drastic changes to its cast over the like couple seasons. like a few major characters have changed, and you know, the team dynamic has changed because characters have come and gone when it comes to the team. So that's the closest thing, but there's a lot of the core characters still there too. So it's kind of split down the middle in that particular situation. I mean, it's kind of interesting because when you actually think about this whole conversation, it's very pertinent to the MCU right now, you know, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because eventually, fairly soon, they're going to go through a dramatic change because a lot of contracts are up, so a lot of characters are going to be changing. Because obviously, once again, kind of going back to comic books, we know that there are different people who pick up even the moniker of Captain America. We know Sam Wilson, Falcon becomes him at one point in time, but we also know Bucky, the Winter Soldier, becomes Captain America at a different point in time too. So that's kind of an interesting thing, because that kind of goes back to what I'm talking about. We're following a set certain character. This wise, I'm okay, like I understand it, and it's just like, yeah, it's comic books, you know, it kind of feels that same role as comic books, but like, I'm totally fine with them doing that, because it's like, yeah, as long as they close out these character stories, that's fine. But it's just, yeah, these are characters we've gotten to attach to. I mean, especially in Iron Man's case, a character we've gotten attached to over the course of 10 years, 11 by the time Avengers 4 comes out. But still, you get what I'm talking about. So it's going to be interesting, because that kind of fits in that discussion too, which I think is such a fascinating thing. I mean, I feel like it's going to be harder to accept new characters coming in, because it's like, oh man, these old characters we've come to know and love are gone. So, because that's that same thing, mentality a lot of people have, like, oh, I don't want Iron Man to be replaced, which, once again, that's a conversation I'm saving for another video. So, but nevertheless, ultimately, my question for you guys is, how do you feel about that? Do you kind of agree or disagree with that sentiment of, like, when it comes to a series, would you prefer kind of following the same cast of characters through the entire series, or would you prefer if they're like, no, like I said, using kind of the anthology sense of like taking this world and following different characters and it, like using some of the examples I gave, like some of the superhero TV shows and stuff like that? Would you prefer them to kind of have a Misfits or Being Human approach? Once again, Being Human, the British series, because the American series never, the North American series never did it. But like, would you prefer where it's like, oh yeah, they do it eventually and that's okay, even if it's near the end of the series? Or would you be like, no, do it sooner if you plan on doing it? Like, let me know how you feel about everything, because even using the Misfits example, that's a lot of that's, you know, brought about because, like, that's most likely because the actors themselves decided to leave the show, which I think is fine and dandy to kind of bring in replacement characters for that, which that's kind of a conversation I'm going to have, you know, all in all for a different video. But whether it be something like that because the actors deciding they're going to leave the show, so you have to write and kind of cover that and bring in new characters, or whether it's just because storytelling wise you're like, yeah, these characters are going, let's focus on these characters. Just let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd really love to kind of get your opinion about this. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.